The battlefield was a graveyard of fire and metal. Smoke covered the sky, turning the sun into a faint red glow. Explosions shook the ground, and laser fire cut through the air like deadly rain. The war between humanity and the HFY had raged for years, and today was supposed to be the final stand. Jero stood at the front lines, his armor scorched but his grip on his weapon firm. He was a soldier, a warrior, and he had fought too many battles to count. His squad stood beside him, their eyes filled with the same determination. They were outnumbered, but that had never stopped them before. The HFY were monstrous beings, their bodies covered in hardened exoskeletons, their limbs sharp like blades. They moved fast, fought without fear, and never surrendered. But neither did humanity. Jero ducked behind a broken wall as a plasma blast struck inches from his head. His comrade, Bren, fired back, taking down an enemy with precise shots. "We push forward. We don't stop," Jero ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. His squad moved as one, covering each other, advancing despite the odds. The human forces were pressing forward, breaking the enemy's defenses, but the HFY were relentless. They adapted quickly. They fought harder when pushed back. Jero's instincts screamed at him, just as a high-pitched sound filled the air. He turned, too late. A massive HFY warrior stood just feet away, its energy weapon aimed directly at him. A flash of blue light, pain like fire. The world spun. Jero fell to his knees, his vision blurred, his mind struggling to process what had happened. He looked down, and his breath caught in his throat. His arms were gone, both of them. The energy blast had cut clean through. His rifle lay on the ground beside him, useless. His body shook, not from fear, but from shock. Jero's down. Bren's voice was distant, almost unreal. "Fall back. We have tow." Another explosion. Screams. The sound of retreating footsteps. His squad was being forced to leave him behind. Jero's vision darkened. His body was failing. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was a shape standing over him. Tall, metallic, glowing blue eyes. Not an enemy. An android. Jero woke to silence. His mind was slow, his body weak. He wasn't dead. That much he knew. But he wasn't on the battlefield either. Blinking, he tried to move, but pain shot through him. He turned his head. He was inside a ruined building, lying against cold metal. He lifted his arms, except there were no arms to lift. Reality crashed down on him like a hammer. He had lost them. His breathing grew uneven, panic threatening to take over. A warrior with no arms was no warrior at all. He was useless now. A soft mechanical hum broke the silence. Jero turned his head. The android stood a few feet away, its body sleek and battle-worn. It was humanoid in design, though clearly a machine. Its eyes glowed faintly as it observed him. "You are alive," it said in a calm, almost human voice. Jero narrowed his eyes. "Why did you save me?" His voice was hoarse, dry. The android tilted its head. "You are not an enemy." Jero scoffed. "That's it." He let his head rest against the cold surface behind him. His body felt heavy. He had no strength left. "The battle is over," the android said. "Your forces retreated. The HFY control this area now." Jero closed his eyes. That meant he was trapped behind enemy lines. No way to fight. No way to call for help. No way to survive. His hands clenched. Except they didn't. He had no hands anymore. A bitter laugh escaped him. "Then why bother saving me? I can't fight like this." The android stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "You are mistaken." Jero turned his head, frowning. "What?" The android looked at its own arms, strong, metal, designed for precision and durability. Then, without hesitation, it reached up and detached them. Jero's breath caught. "What are you doing?" The android placed its arms beside him. "You need them more than I do." Jero stared in shock. "You're giving me your arms." The android's eyes flickered. "I am not programmed to value myself above others." Jero swallowed hard. He had seen machines sacrifice themselves before, but this felt different. The android wasn't following orders. It was making a choice. The android's body powered down, its core dimming. It had given up its own functionality for him. Jero looked at the mechanical arms lying beside him. He wasn't an engineer, but he knew enough. If he could attach them to his armor, connect them to his neural system, he wasn't useless yet. With great effort, he pushed himself up, pain shooting through his body. He grabbed one of the android's arms with his teeth, dragging it closer. His mind worked through the steps. It would take time. It would take all his remaining strength. But if he could do this, he wouldn't be broken anymore. He would fight again. Jero sat against the cold metal wall, breathing heavily. Pain burned through his body, but he forced himself to stay awake. He couldn't afford to pass out again. His arms, no, the empty space where his arms had been, ached with a dull, ghostly pain. He stared at the two mechanical arms lying beside him, the ones the android had given up. He still couldn't believe it. The android, X-92, had removed its own arms without hesitation. No orders, no hesitation, just a decision. A machine had chosen to save a human. Jero exhaled slowly. He didn't have time to think about the why. Right now, survival was all that mattered. He studied the arms closely. They were well-built, durable alloy plating, precise servo motors, and a neural interface system designed for rapid response. They weren't simple tools. They were made for combat. If he could attach them to his armor and connect them to his nervous system, he might regain control. He might fight again. But first, he had to move. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself forward with his legs, crawling toward the nearest arm. His balance was off without his own arms, and every movement felt wrong. But he didn't stop. He grabbed the mechanical limb with his foot, pulling it closer. The process was slow, frustrating, and painful, but he had no choice. He leaned forward and inspected the connection ports in his armor. His suit had an integrated neural link system, allowing human soldiers to control external weaponry. If he could rewire the android's arms to match his system, he could connect them directly to his body. But he had to work fast. The Xelari would return soon. He was behind enemy lines, and if they found him like this, he wouldn't stand a chance. Jero looked at the android's powered-down body. "You better not have given up your arms for nothing," he muttered. Then he got to work. Hours passed. Jero lost track of time, lost in the process of modifying the arms. It wasn't easy. Without hands, he had to use his teeth, his legs, and even the jagged edges of the ruined wall to manipulate wires and circuits. He made mistakes. He had to start over more than once. But he didn't stop. He rewired the power system, adjusted the connection ports, and bypassed the android's security protocols. Sweat dripped down his face, and his body ached. But he ignored it. His mind was sharp, focused. Finally, the modifications were done. Jero took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. If he had done this wrong, the system would overload, and he might never be able to move again. But if he was right, he pressed his shoulder stumps against the connection points and activated the neural interface. Pain shot through his body like electricity. Jero gritted his teeth, his muscles tensing as his nervous system adjusted to the foreign connection. It was like his body was rejecting the new limbs, but he refused to let go. He focused, forcing his mind to adapt. Then, the fingers twitched. His heart pounded. He tried again. The metal fingers flexed, curling into a fist. His fist. Jero let out a breathless laugh. It worked. Slowly, he lifted his arms. The motion was awkward, stiff, but it was motion. The android's arms were now his, and they responded to his thoughts just like his real ones once had. He stood up, For the first time since the battle, he felt like himself again. No, not just himself. He was something new. Stronger. Faster. Still human, but enhanced. Jero clenched his new fists. The android had given him a second chance. Now he had to use it. The sound of movement snapped him to attention. Jero turned toward the noise, his new arms shifting smoothly. His hearing was sharper now, his reaction time faster. He scanned the area. Shadows moved in the distance. Scifi patrols. They were searching the ruins, looking for survivors. He couldn't stay here. Jero looked at the powered-down android one last time. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned away and ran. His new legs carried him faster than before, his balance surprisingly stable despite the weight of the mechanical arms. He moved through the wreckage with purpose, his mind already forming a plan. He had no weapons, no backup, and no way to contact his squad. But he had something more important. He had the will to fight. And as long as he could fight, he wasn't done yet. Jero found shelter in the remains of an old outpost. The structure was damaged, but its power core was still active. He accessed the terminal, scanning for any remaining human signals. Static. Then, a faint transmission. Jero's pulse quickened. It was weak, broken, but it was there. A human distress signal. He activated the communicator, adjusting the frequency. "This is Jero." Repeat. "This is Jero. I'm alive." Silence. Then a familiar voice. "Jaro?" His chest tightened. It was Bren. His squad was still out there. Jero exhaled. "Yeah, I'm still breathing." Bren's voice was filled with shock. "How? We thought you were gone." Jero glanced at his metal hands. Long story. He looked out at the ruins, determination burning in his chest. "But I'm not done yet." A pause. Then Bren's voice came back, stronger. "Where are you? We'll come for you." Jero smirked. "No need. I'm coming to you." He shut off the communicator and stepped forward. The battle had taken everything from him. His arms, his past, his place in the war. But now, with the android's gift, he had been reborn. The Exilari thought they had defeated him. They were wrong. He was just getting started. Jero moved through the ruins with silent precision. His new arms adjusted to every motion, responding faster and smoother than he had expected. The android's sacrifice had given him a second chance, not just to survive, but to fight again. He reached the edge of a broken structure and crouched low. The Exilari patrol was near. Their dark, armored bodies moved through the wreckage, scanning for survivors. Jero watched them closely. He had no weapons, no backup, just his mind and his new limbs. And that was enough. His hands flexed, the metal fingers moving without delay. He was still adjusting to the weight and strength of them, but they worked. That was all that mattered. For now, Jero spent the next hour testing his body, learning his limits. He found an abandoned supply crate and forced it open, using the raw strength of his new arms. Inside, he found a combat knife, a broken energy rifle, and a small data pad. The rifle was useless. The power core was damaged beyond repair. But the knife, that was something he could use. He secured it to his armor, then powered on the data pad. The screen flickered, struggling to function, but after a few seconds, a map appeared. Jero studied it carefully. His squad had retreated west toward an old command station, but they weren't safe yet. The Exilari would be hunting them. If he wanted to reach them, he had to move fast. But first, he needed a weapon. He looked at his hands again, then at the broken rifle. A thought formed in his mind. If the rifle didn't work as a gun, maybe he could use its parts for something else. He started working. The process was slow. Jero had no tools, only his metal fingers and raw determination. He stripped the rifle, removed its damaged power core, and rewired the energy circuits into his right arm. It was risky, One wrong connection could overload the entire system. But Jero was careful. He adjusted the wiring, linking it to his neural interface. When the last circuit was in place, he took a deep breath and activated it. A faint hum filled the air. Jero lifted his right hand. A small pulse of blue light flickered at his palm. It wasn't much, just a low-power energy burst, but it was enough to stun an enemy or disable a machine. He smirked. That'll do. Now he had a weapon. Now he was ready. Night fell over the ruined city. Jero moved like a shadow, his new arms allowing him to climb walls, lift debris, and navigate the terrain with ease. He was faster, stronger, more precise. The Xilari wouldn't expect this, and he planned to use that to his advantage. He spotted a patrol up ahead, 3 Xilari soldiers guarding a supply vehicle. They carried plasma rifles, their armor thick and durable. A direct fight was impossible, so Jero didn't fight directly. Instead, he moved to higher ground, climbing the remains of a collapsed building. He positioned himself above them, watching their movements, waiting for the right moment. One of the Xilari turned away. Jero struck. He dropped down silently, his metal fingers wrapping around the alien's throat. Before it could react, he slammed its head against the ground. Hard. The creature collapsed, unconscious. The other 2 turned, but Jero was already moving. He raised his right hand and fired the energy pulse. The blue light struck one of them in the chest, causing its armor to short-circuit. Sparks flew as the Xilari stumbled back. Jero dashed forward, dodging the remaining soldier's attack. He grabbed its rifle with his left hand, twisting it out of the alien's grip, then drove his knee into its stomach. The creature fell to the ground, gasping for air. In seconds, it was over. Jero exhaled and picked up one of the plasma rifles. That's better. Now armed, he checked the supply vehicle. Inside, he found food rations, medical kits, and most importantly, a working communicator. He turned it on. Static filled his ears, but then, a voice. Repeat, this is Bren. If anyone can hear this, we're holding position at the old command station, but we need reinforcements. The Xilari are closing in. We won't last much longer. Jero's jaw tightened. His squad was in trouble. He grabbed the communicator. Bren, this is Jero. I'm on my way. A long pause. Then, Jero. Bren's voice was filled with shock. How? We thought you were dead. Jero glanced at his metal hands. Not yet. Bren's voice turned serious. Listen, we don't have much time. The Xilari are setting up an attack. If we don't get help soon, we're done. Jero's grip on the rifle tightened. Hold your position. I'll get to you. Bren hesitated. Alone. Jero smirked. Trust me. He turned off the communicator and climbed into the supply vehicle. The engine roared to life. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He wasn't just a soldier with lost arms. He was something more. And he was ready to fight. The supply vehicle rumbled through the ruins, its tires crushing broken metal and debris beneath them. Jero gripped the controls tightly, his metal fingers adjusting to the delicate movements needed to steer. The dashboard flickered with damaged screens, and the fuel gauge was running low, but it didn't matter. He had to reach his squad before the Xilari overwhelmed them. The night was quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that warned of danger. Jero's eyes scanned the road ahead, watching for movement. He knew the Xilari wouldn't let him pass through their territory easily. He had to be ready. Minutes later, his instincts proved right. A sudden flash of blue light appeared in the distance. Xilari patrol drones. They hovered above the wreckage, their scanners sweeping the area. If they spotted him, they would call reinforcements. Jero exhaled slowly. He had to act first. He reached for the plasma rifle beside him. His metal fingers wrapped around the weapon, feeling its weight. He had tested his new hands, but this was the first real fight with them. He didn't hesitate. Jero slammed the brakes and leaned out of the vehicle, aiming at the nearest drone. He squeezed the trigger. A bolt of energy shot through the air, striking the drone's core. Sparks exploded from the machine as it spun wildly, then crashed to the ground. The second drone reacted instantly. Its scanner locked onto him, and a warning signal blared through the air. Jero didn't give it a chance. He lifted his right hand and fired an energy pulse from his modified arm. The blue wave hit the drone, causing its systems to overload. It flickered, sputtered, then collapsed in a heap of smoking metal. Jero pulled himself back inside and hit the accelerator. The vehicle roared forward, speeding through the ruins. The Exilari would have heard the signal. He had to move fast. The road ahead twisted through the remains of a once great city. Towering buildings, now broken and lifeless, cast long shadows under the pale moonlight. Jero kept his focus sharp. He was close to the command station, maybe 10 more minutes. Then he saw them. A blockade. Scifi soldiers had set up a defensive point, their weapons glowing in the darkness. A heavy turret was positioned at the center, its barrel aimed straight at the road. Jero gritted his teeth. A direct attack was suicide. He had to be smart. He slowed the vehicle, shutting off the lights to avoid detection. Then he climbed out, moving silently toward higher ground. His new arms gave him an advantage. He climbed the side of a broken structure with ease, his metal fingers gripping the rough edges without struggle. From above, he analyzed the enemy's position. 5 soldiers, 1 turret, and several supply crates stacked nearby. If he could cause an explosion, he could take out most of them at once. His eyes locked onto a power cell sitting near the crates. That was his target. Jero adjusted his grip on the plasma rifle, took a deep breath, and fired. The energy bolt struck the power cell. For a second, nothing happened. Then, boom! The explosion tore through the blockade, sending debris flying. The turret was thrown backward, crashing into rubble. 2 Scifi soldiers were caught in the blast, their bodies flung aside. The remaining soldiers scrambled, trying to recover. Jero didn't give them time. He leaped from the building, landing with precision. His new arms absorbed the impact as he rolled forward. 1 Scifi turned to fire. Jero was faster. He swung his metal fist, slamming it into the soldier's chest. The impact sent the alien flying backward. The last soldier raised his weapon, but Jero was already moving. He lifted his right hand and fired another energy pulse. The blue wave hit the Xilari, disrupting its armor. Jero followed up with a swift kick, knocking it unconscious. Silence. Jero took a deep breath. The battle was over. He walked toward the wreckage, grabbing a fresh plasma rifle from the fallen. He checked the energy level. Full charge. Good. He climbed back into the supply vehicle and drove past the destroyed blockade. He was getting closer now. He could feel it. The command station came into view minutes later. The old human outpost was half buried in rubble, its defenses barely holding together. Jero saw movement on the walls. His squad. They were still alive. But so were the Xilari. A large enemy force had gathered outside the station, preparing for an attack. Jero counted at least 20 soldiers, along with heavy artillery. His squad wouldn't last long against those odds. Jero gripped the controls. He had to act now. He pushed the accelerator to full speed, driving straight toward the enemy. The Xilari turned, surprised by the sudden vehicle charging toward them. They aimed their weapons, but Jero was already moving. At the last second, he jumped out, letting the vehicle crash into the enemy ranks. The impact sent Scifi flying, buying him a few seconds. Jero landed on his feet and opened fire. Plasma bolts ripped through the air, hitting enemies before they could react. He moved like a ghost, his new arms giving him speed and strength beyond normal human limits. He weaved between attacks, his metal fists striking with devastating force. Bren's voice shouted from the station, "Jero!" "No time." Jero yelled back, grabbing a fallen enemy's grenade and throwing it toward a group of Silari. The explosion cleared the area, giving the humans a chance to push forward. The battle turned. Jero's squad surged out of the station, fighting back with renewed strength. The Silari, caught off guard, struggled to hold their ground. One by one, they fell. Minutes later, it was over. The Silari retreated into the night, leaving behind their fallen. The command station was safe. For now. Jero stood among his squad, breathing heavily. Bren stepped forward, staring at him with disbelief. You have metal arms." Jero smirked. "Yeah, long story." Bren shook his head. "I don't know how you survived, but we wouldn't have made it without you." Jero looked at his metal hands, then at the battlefield. He had lost everything in that first fight, but now he was back. Stronger. And the war wasn't over yet. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burned metal. The battle was over, but Jero knew the war was far from finished. His squad gathered around him, some injured, all exhausted. Their faces were a mix of relief and disbelief as they stared at him. "You're really alive," Bren said again, shaking his head. "And you have." He gestured toward Jero's metal arms. Jero smirked. "Yeah, it's a long story." Bren crossed his arms. "We've got time." Jero glanced around. The command station was barely standing. Its walls were cracked, and its defenses were down. They had won the fight, but if the Silari returned in greater numbers, they wouldn't last. "We need to move," Jero said. "This place won't hold if they send more troops." Bren frowned. "And go where?" "We're cut off. The main human forces are on the other side of the wasteland. Even if we make it out of here, we'll have to cross enemy territory." Jero clenched his fists, feeling the power in his new arms. "Then we fight our way through." The squad exchanged uncertain looks. They were tired, low on supplies, and outnumbered. But Jero wasn't the same soldier they had lost. He was something more now. And he had a plan. Jero gathered the squad inside the remains of the command center. He pulled up the old map of the region, scanning for possible escape routes. "The Silari control most of the roads," he said. "If we go the direct way, we'll walk into another ambush." Bren studied the map. "What about through the industrial ruins?" "It's dangerous, but it's better than an open battlefield." Jero nodded. "That's our best shot. We move through the ruins, stay out of sight, and avoid major patrols." One of the soldiers, Mira, frowned. "What about the Silari command post? They have a comm tower there. If they spot us, they'll send everything they've got." Jero's eyes darkened. "Then we take it out first." Silence fell over the room. The idea was risky. Attacking the Silari's command post with their small squad was almost impossible. Almost. Bren sighed. "You really think we can do this?" Jero flexed his metal fingers. "I know we can." Bren studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's move." The squad moved out before dawn. The sky was a dark shade of blue, the first hints of light creeping over the horizon. Jero led the way, his enhanced senses helping him detect movement before the others could. His new arms adjusted to every motion, making him faster, stronger, more precise. The industrial ruins were a maze of broken factories and collapsed buildings. Rusted pipes ran along the walls, and old machinery lay abandoned, covered in dust. It was the perfect place to stay hidden. But it was also the perfect place for an ambush. Jero signaled the squad to stop. He scanned the area, his vision picking up a faint glimmer in the distance. "Silari scouts." He lowered his voice. "We have company." Bren gripped his rifle. "How many?" Jero narrowed his eyes. "4. They haven't seen us yet." Mira whispered. "We could sneak around them." Jero considered it. They needed to stay quiet, but if the Silari found their trail, they'd alert the command post. No risks. "I'll take them out," Jero said. Bren looked at him. "Alone?" Jero smirked. Trust me." Before anyone could argue, he moved. Jero slipped through the ruins, using his speed and agility to stay out of sight. His new arms allowed him to climb and move with precision, making no sound. The first Scifi scout stood near a rusted pipe, scanning the area. Jero moved in quickly, grabbing the alien from behind and knocking it unconscious with a single blow. The second turned too late. Jero's metal fist slammed into its chest, sending it crashing into the rubble. The last two noticed the attack and raised their weapons, but Jero was already in motion. He fired an energy pulse from his right hand, stunning one of them. Before the last scout could react, Jero dashed forward, using his enhanced strength to drive the enemy into the ground. Silence. Jero exhaled. His squad emerged from the shadows, eyes wide. That was. Bren shook his head. "Okay, I see your point." Jero grinned. "Let's keep moving." The auxiliary command post was in sight. A tall metal tower loomed above the ruins, surrounded by enemy soldiers. Jero studied the defenses. "We take out the tower first. That will cut their communications." Mira adjusted her rifle. And then, Jero's smirk returned. "Then we show them what humans can do." Bren rolled his eyes. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Jero flexed his metal fingers. "A little." The squad took positions. Jero climbed to higher ground, while the others spread out. Jero raised his right hand, energy building up in his palm. He aimed at the base of the tower. Then he fired. The pulse struck the structure, causing an explosion that sent shockwaves through the air. Alarms blared as the tower collapsed in a shower of sparks and metal. The auxiliary turned in panic, but the squad was already attacking. Plasma fire lit up the ruins as Jero's team moved in, taking down enemies before they could regroup. Jero leaped into the fight, his mechanical fists striking with incredible force. One Scifi charged at him. He caught its weapon with his left hand, crushed it, and sent the soldier flying with a single punch. The battle was intense, but it didn't last long. With the command tower down and their forces in chaos, the Scifi couldn't hold their position. The few that survived retreated. Jero stood among the wreckage, breathing hard. Bren walked up beside him, shaking his head. "You really are something else now." Jero looked at his hands, then at his squad. "Unstill me." He turned toward the open path ahead. And we're not done yet. Their mission wasn't over. But now, they had a chance. The Scifi command post lay in ruins, smoke rising into the dark sky. The squad stood among the wreckage, catching their breath. The battle had been tough, but they had won. Jero wiped dirt from his face, his metal fingers clenching and unclenching. His new arms had proven their worth. He was faster, stronger, more than he had ever been. But he wasn't invincible. His body still ached. His mind still felt the exhaustion of battle. Bren walked up beside him. "We took down their comm tower, but that won't stop them for long. They'll send reinforcements soon." Jero nodded. "Then we don't stay here." Mira pointed toward the horizon. "The wasteland starts just beyond those cliffs. If we move now, we can stay ahead of the Scifi." Jero turned to his squad. "Then let's go." They moved quickly, leaving the ruined command post behind. The wasteland stretched out before them, an endless landscape of cracked earth, towering rock formations, and abandoned structures from a war long forgotten. The sun began to rise, casting an orange glow over the barren land. Heat waves shimmered in the distance, and the wind carried the sound of shifting sand. Bren sighed. "I hate this place." Jero smirked. "Good. That means the Scifi will hate it too." Mira checked her rifle. "We need to stay alert. There's no cover out here. If the Scifi send scouts, we'll have nowhere to hide." Jero's eyes scanned the horizon. "Then we don't let them see us first." Hours passed. The squad moved in silence, their boots kicking up dust. The heat pressed down on them, and their water supply was running low. Then, Jero spotted something in the distance. A structure. It was an old human outpost, partially buried in sand. The walls were broken, and the roof had caved in, but it was shelter. Jero signaled to the squad. "We'll rest there." They reached the outpost and entered carefully. The inside was dark and smelled of rust, but it was cool. The squad collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Bren leaned against the wall. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Jero sat beside him. "We just have to reach the human forces. Once we do, we'll be safe." Mira frowned. "If they're still there." Jero looked at her. "They are. We just have to make it to them." Silence fell over the group. They all knew the risks. The wasteland was dangerous, and the Xilari were still hunting them. But they had come too far to stop now. Night fell over the wasteland, and the squad took turns keeping watch. Jero sat near the entrance, his metal fingers tapping against his knee. He thought about everything that had happened. Losing his arms, getting the android's gift, fighting his way back to his squad. He had changed, but he wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Was he still the same soldier? The same person? He didn't know. But he knew one thing. He couldn't stop now. A noise pulled him from his thoughts. Footsteps. Jero tensed, gripping his rifle. He signaled to the squad, and they silently took positions. Then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared. Not a Xilari, a human. The man staggered forward, his face covered in dust and sweat. His uniform was torn, and his breathing was heavy. Jero stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man looked up, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "Name's Rick. I was with the main human forces before we got attacked." Bren stepped closer. "Attacked? By the Xilari?" Rick nodded weakly. "We were holding a position near the mountains. They came in fast. Too many of them. We had to scatter. Some of us might still be alive." Jero's jaw tightened. "Where?" Rick pointed west. "About a day's walk from here. But the Xilari are searching the area." Jero looked at his squad. Their mission had just changed. They weren't just escaping anymore. They had to find the survivors. The next morning, the squad set out. Rick, still weak, led them toward the last known location of the human forces. The journey was difficult. The wasteland stretched endlessly before them, and every step felt heavier than the last. Then in the distance, they saw it. A battlefield. The ground was scorched, the remains of human vehicles scattered across the sand. Xilari patrols moved through the wreckage, searching for survivors. Bren clenched his fists. "We're too late." Jero narrowed his eyes. "No, there might still be people alive." Mira exhaled. "So what's the plan?" Jero's metal fingers flexed. "We get in. We find the survivors, and we get them out." Bren smirked. "Just like that." Jero grinned. "Just like that." They moved carefully, sneaking through the wreckage. The Xilari were distracted, searching for anything useful among the ruins. Jero's squad stayed low, scanning for movement. Then, a signal. A faint red light blinked beneath a collapsed vehicle, a distress beacon. Jero rushed forward, lifting the heavy metal with his enhanced strength. Beneath it, 2 human soldiers lay trapped, their armor scratched and dented. One of them, a woman with short black hair, gasped as she saw Jero. "You're human." Jero smirked. "Yeah, and we're getting you out of here." Bren and Mira helped the injured soldiers while Jero kept watch. The Xilari were still searching, unaware of their presence. For now, Jero turned to his squad. "We move fast, get them up, and let's go." But before they could leave, an alarm blared. The Xilari had spotted them. Bren cursed. "So much for sneaking out." Jero lifted his rifle. "Then we fight our way out." The Xilari charge. Plasma fire lit up the night. Jero's metal fists clenched. The battle had begun. The alarm blared through the wreckage. echoing in the silent wasteland. Jarrow tightened his grip on his rifle, his metal fingers clenching around the weapon. The auxiliary had spotted them. There was no running now. Bren cursed under his breath. So much for a quiet escape. Mira pulled the injured soldier up. We have to move. Fast. Jarrow scanned the battlefield. Auxiliary patrols were closing in from every direction. Their glowing eyes flickered in the darkness, their weapons charged and ready. Jarrow turned to his squad. Stick together. Protect the wounded. We fight our way out. Bren smirked. You always pick the hard way. Jarrow grinned. It's the only way. The auxiliary charge. Jarrow moved first. His mechanical arms reacted instantly, faster than his old body ever could. He fired his rifle, each shot striking with deadly precision. His left arm swung forward, releasing a pulse blast that sent 2 auxiliary flying. Bren and Mira took cover behind a broken vehicle, returning fire. Plasma bolts lit up the night as the squad pushed forward. Jarrow caught a glimpse of the wounded soldiers struggling to keep up. Rick, weak but determined, helped his injured friend. Keep moving, Jarrow shouted. Auxiliary leaked from the shadows, its weapon aimed at Rick. Jarrow reacted instantly, his metal fist slamming into the enemy's chest. The alien crashed into the sand, motionless. More auxiliary appeared. Too many. Bren shouted, We're getting surrounded. Jarrow's mind raced. They needed a way out. His eyes locked onto a half-buried human transport in the wreckage. If that thing still works, Jarrow muttered. The squad fought their way to the transport. It was an old armored vehicle, its hull dented and covered in dust. Mira jumped inside, searching the controls. Power's dead. I might be able to restart it, but I need time. Jarrow turned back to the battlefield. The auxiliary were closing in. Time was something they didn't have. Bren, help Mira, Jarrow ordered. I'll hold them off. Bren hesitated. Jarrow, you can't take them all alone. Jarrow smirked. Watch me. He stepped forward, his metal fists glowing with energy. The auxiliary rushed at him. Jarrow met them head-on. The battle was brutal. Jarrow's mechanical arms moved like lightning, blocking, striking, countering. Every punch sent shockwaves through the air, every hit knocking the auxiliary back. A plasma bolt struck his shoulder. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth. He wasn't going down. Not now. Another auxiliary lunged at him with a blade. Jarrow caught it mid-air, snapping it in half before throwing the alien aside. But they kept coming. He fought harder, faster. His arms, his body, everything was pushed to the limit. Sparks flew from his metal joints. His breath came in ragged gasps. He couldn't keep this up forever. Then, a loud hum filled the air. The transport roared to life. Bren shouted, It's working. Get in. Jarrow didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted toward the vehicle. The squad piled in, dragging the wounded inside. Mira slammed the controls, and the transport shot forward, its engines kicking up sand as it sped across the wasteland. Jarrow collapsed in the back, breathing hard. His metal hands shook. His body ached. But they had done it. They were alive. The transport rumbled across the wasteland, moving toward the last known location of the human forces. The auxiliary pursued for a short time, but they fell behind, unable to match the speed of the armored vehicle. Inside, the squad sat in silence, catching their breath. Rick, still weak, looked at Jarrow. You saved us. Jarrow let out a tired chuckle. That's what humans do. Mira smirked. I gotta admit, those arms of yours, not bad. Bren nodded. Yeah. You're not the same Jarrow we knew, but that's not a bad thing. Jarrow flexed his fingers. He had wondered if he was still the same person, if losing his arms had made him less human. But now, looking at his squad, his friends, he knew the truth. He was still Jarrow, and he was still a warrior. Hours passed. The sun began to rise again, casting golden light over the wasteland. Then, in the distance, a signal, a human distress beacon. Bren pointed. That's them. The main forces. Hope filled the squad's tired eyes. They weren't alone. As the transport sped toward safety, Jero looked down at his metal hands one last time. He had lost his arms, but he had gained something greater. A second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The end.